Hi, welcome to Promo Insiders, an ASI Media podcast that covers the topics that matter most to the promotional products industry. I'm CJ Mitica, editor-in-chief of ASI Media, and today we're diving into our just-released annual state and regional sales report. ASI Research Director Nate Kuzma joins me to discuss which states are up, spoiler alert, all of them, and where are the greatest opportunities for growth. Nate, thanks for being here today. More importantly, thank you for not turning down my constant invitations to be on our podcast.
Well, no, my pleasure, of course. I mean, I'm being paid for this, so it's fine. Thank you to all of our, people that pay me at ASI to do this. No problem.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm not paying Nate. It's just his normal salary. So just to be clear, there's no special favors involved. Yeah, we're talking about our state and regional sales report. We do this annually. We typically do this in the late spring, early summer this year, and we're gonna go through the numbers and take an overall look and also a more detailed look at the regions and the individual states and to see where the greatest opportunities are. But to start off with, Nate, how do you come up with the numbers? Like what sorts of things do you take into account to sort of calculate this, specifically the promo sales for the regions and states in the U.S.?
Yeah, we actually it's a lot of research, and it actually comes from a lot of different sources. We put out a lot of statistics for our industry, right? We do the state of the industry, which is coming out in July. It comes out every July, and that is primarily derived from interviews and surveys that are conducted with our industry, and that's really the primary source of that. And we also do quarterly sales estimates where we reach out to our members and we figure out exactly what are they seeing on a quarterly basis, and also looking forward to what are their expectations. This is a little unique though, because not only do we look at industry data that we collect from our surveys, but we look at total sales and we ask questions about total sales by state or by region, but we also use census data and data that's put out by the US government, primarily the Census Department. And these include things such as unemployment rates. It includes small business opens and failures. It includes population estimates and where sort of populations are changing. And it also includes estimates of state GDPs. Because what we find is very often the promotional products industry and the sales within it do actually somewhat mirror the overall economic environment within states. So that's also, so when you take all of those, we come up with what are these estimates and figures for the overall industry, and you do see some pretty stark differences by states as well, which is always pretty fascinating.
So we're going to dive into this data. I do want to mention, though, that you can find our state and regional sales report if you go to our website. It'll be right on the asicentral.com/news. It'll be on the front page. We are promoting this prominently, and it should also be, I think, in the research section of the website. Am I correct in that, Nate?
It will be there, not immediately, but it will be there after it's posted for sure.
Okay. Fantastic. So Nate, can you see my lovely PowerPoint here?
I can. It's better than what I put together.
My PowerPoint skills pale in comparison to yours. So thank you for that compliment. So the first thing we're going to do is sort of do an overall look, and I'll just tick off these numbers here. So again, overall for the U.S. in 2021, total promotional sales 23.2 billion, 12% growth. If you look at it by region, South had the most growth and the highest total at 9 billion and 16%. The West, 5.3 billion, 13%. The East, 4.6 billion, 7%. And the Midwest, 4.3 billion with 9% growth. Nate, those numbers seem pretty high, especially the growth totals. I assume is that just a matter of rebounding from where things were in 2020 because of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly part of it, right? There's certainly been like you pull back the rubber band. The rubber band was pulled back nearly 20% in 2020 from 2019. I think the industry was down 19.8%. So what happened is there was a huge contraction. In 2019, the industry was over $25 billion in sales, right? So let's put all of this a little bit into perspective in that it's still down a couple $1 billion.
Yes.
We're throwing around billions like it's like, just chump change. It ain't. It's down a couple of $1 billion from where it was in 2019. So yes, no, this is a natural snapping back of the rubber band a little bit. So we've seen that not only with within our industry, but you've seen that also in just overall consumer trends. I mean, right now as we're filming this right now, inflation is pretty damn high, right?
Yeah.
I think I saw a number was like 8% annualized, which is staggeringly large from what we've seen in the past. So, prices have certainly been going up, but so have the things that really drive our industry. The events, the opening of schools, education, even healthcare, which was sharp, which was actually really strong last year, is still hasn't given back those gains. So it's doing well. So it's all of those things across these different regions that are driving the growth. And to be clear, there's different drivers of growth by each region as well.
Yeah, and we'll definitely dive into it. Just for some historical perspective, though, the South has always been the biggest region. It has multiple powerhouse states in it, and it's so you can see in terms of this total, it's nearly double the West and the Midwest combined. So it's really impressive. The West has surged in the past few years, where it was like the third biggest. It's now the second biggest, and there's a lot of growth there. We'll talk about that as well. And the Midwest and East have sort of been the steady, the steady presences are like not a lot of growth, and it's just, but even still, Midwest 9%, the East 7%. In normal years, like that would be like something we're celebrating, right?
Yeah. In normal years, you're used to we've seen growth rates as low as 2.5%, 3% by region.
Sure.
If the industry might have gone up by 6%, a lot of that 6% would be heavily weighted towards one or two of the regions, definitely not all four. So no, in a normal year, these would be staggeringly large numbers. But even with that said, though, in the abnormal year that 2021 was, they're still very, very good.
And real quick, Nate, as we look at these states in detail, how can our listeners or viewers, people in the promo industry, use this data to help them with their business?
It's interesting. There's a couple of ways to do it. The easiest one is if you're part of a big enough company, maybe look at those states that are expanding the quickest, right? And there's certainly going to be that. And there's a lot more detail in the report about that. But I guess there's other things that you can do, and that's really like look at the states that are expanding and just do a little bit of research about why they're expanding. I mean, there's going to be some of that for sure covered in the editorial content that accompanies these pretty PowerPoint charts that you have here, right? But definitely dig into that, and it really helps to give an overall understanding of what are the growth drivers for states. And very often it's because of what's happening in that state. And it's something to keep in mind, even if you live in that state, to really be fully aware of it, because there's a lot that goes into a state that's growing by 18% or 15%, right? So what's driving and really trying to understand it? Obviously there's been states in the past when we've done this, not this year, right? But in the past where you actually saw states shrink, primarily due to high unemployment, primarily due to falling state GDPs, gross domestic or gross state products, I guess. So you've seen that. And so it's really trying to understand it. And it's a really good launching off point for that type of business planning.
And thank you for that plug. And yes, indeed, in our package that's going to be on the website, not only do we have the data that Nate lovingly produced, but we also have individual reports on each region. We talk to distributors in multiple states and cities to get their on-the-ground perspective. We identify some hot trends and product categories and markets, and we also put out an event calendar of some major events, because with events coming back, these are great opportunities, right, to get to find sales. All right, so we're going to start off with the South. So I'm going to use my excellent PowerPoint skills to switch over. Here we go. Awesome.
Nice transition. Nice transition in the slides.
Yeah, I know. And like I said, my PowerPoint skills are sublime. So to me, honestly, like the numbers are big in the South. But what really amazed me was Texas and Florida, right? These are already massive, multi-billion-dollar marketplaces, and they bounced back 17% for Texas and 18% for Florida in 2021. This just add another like $1 billion worth of revenue in those two states alone. Like, it's really impressive how those big states rebounded last year.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things that are happening here, right? One is the economies in those states are strong, and also, especially Florida was hit pretty hard in 2020 because of the lack of tourism,
Yeah.
hospitality, which is really, yeah, I mean, there's other things in that state, right? But that's really what drives that state. And beyond that, though, just looking at, there are already huge population centers, right? If you want to know why the South is so big, if you look at the biggest states in America, what do you have? California, Texas, Florida, New York, right? Well,
Yeah.
two of those four are located within the southern region, right? So that's really the primary driver of why this gets so big. But you've also had a huge amount of migration into these two states, with the baby boomers retiring, with other people retiring necessarily out of some of the cities or going to other locations such as Austin or Dallas. You've seen a lot of movement into those states from states either out west or in the Northeast and Midwest. So that's really what's driving a lot of the growth in these states.
And another thing to think about, North Carolina and Georgia. So North Carolina, 963 million in promo sales. Georgia, 935 million in promo sales. They're knocking on the door of $1 billion in promo sales. And I think if you ask sort of just a random American, they just paint the South as one broad brush. But these states are major economic hubs, and it's reflected in this data. It's much higher than I think people might expect.
Well, I mean, they have huge cities. I mean, they have very big, and they have fast growing cities.
Mm-hmm.
Just talking about North Carolina, Charlotte's one of the fastest growing cities in America and has been for many years. And Atlanta, the sprawl with Atlanta continues to grow. Right, you have the downtown area, which if you've ever been to the downtown area of Atlanta during the evening hours, it's not exactly what you would consider to be bustling, right?
Sure.
But Atlanta is a gigantic city, and then even beyond that, though, you have so many other cities that within these states that are just, they're growing. There is a movement to southern states with the growth of it. Are there things that maybe eventually will constrain that? Sure, right? But we haven't seen that yet.
And just one final note, next on the list, like Tennessee and South Carolina. Tennessee, 22% growth. South Carolina, 19% growth. I think what really distinguishes the South is that its biggest states, its biggest markets, had major growth last year. That's not the case with the other states, and we're gonna see that. But why is the South so far ahead? Well, the biggest just get bigger, and that's definitely true in the South.
It absolutely is. And again, you see a lot of these states are, they've been actually seen as destinations, and they were also in some cases hit really hard last year.
Yeah, good point. So we're gonna switch over to the West again. This is second, 5.3 billion overall, 13% growth. Now, we talked about Texas and Florida, these big bounce backs. California, by contrast, I mean, 1.8 billion and 8% growth, which is fine. But again, compared to Florida and Texas, which had double-digit growth nearing 20%, it's really a big difference that California didn't rebound in the same manner.
No, they didn't. And like the coin is saying, which I've never heard before, but the West goes as California goes, right? And that's really what it is because of the size of that market. But no, they didn't. And because listen, California is a high cost state to live in. It just is. And if you want to know one of the key constraints on the Northeast, that's one of the key constraints in the Northeast as to getting a lot more people in there and a lot more events in there. When you think about like some large scale events, right, that really help drive, let's put this in our industry's perspective, right? Let's look at where we host our trade shows, right? We have ours in Orlando, we have ours in Fort Worth, and we have ours in Chicago. And the other big industry event, of course, is in Las Vegas, right? There ain't none in the Northeast or on the West Coast. And when you think about the biggest conferences and events in any industry, they're not held in California, and they're not held in New York, and they're not held in New Jersey or Connecticut. They're held in the major hubs. And, in this case, that would be, Las Vegas and Nevada would be one of them. That's why they were up higher than California. But also think about Orlando and, Texas. Those are also big hubs for these with all of the convention centers. So there's a lot of business that's being driven into those locations and not necessarily on the two coasts.
So looking at the data for the West, Nate, what else stands out to you?
It's Is it okay to call a state like a second tier state? I'm not trying to be like insensitive or anything, right?
Well, we'll see. We'll see the angry messages you get after this podcast is released.
Okay, but when I'm talking second tier states, I'm talking about in terms of the overall size of the states. So you're looking at Utah, you're looking at Idaho, you're looking at Montana. All of those states grew over 20%, and in some cases, like Idaho, over 20, almost 30%. And what's driving that? Well, there you have unique things that are happening within those states, in that you have almost like a tech boom, right? So as Silicon Valley, up in Northern California has gotten sort of highly expensive to live in, highly expensive to do business in, what you found is you've had certain companies, and sometimes they're upstarts, sometimes they're well-established companies that have been moving out to some of these hubs. And in some of these hubs, like Salt Lake City, such as Boise, I just saw, some of the fastest growing cities in America are located in those states. So when I talk about second tier states in terms of, they're not one of the biggest states yet, but they are, however, in many cases, the fastest growing states.
Yeah. In fact, one of our freelancers, Andy Van Treese, she lives in Montana, and she can totally tell the difference of people coming in, because she says there's traffic now. There wasn't traffic before in Montana.
There are all these people probably coming from like California and Washington.
Oh
and
yeah.
Oregon.
No, it was definitely a very much pandemic influenced movement. Like I think it was happening before, but the pandemic really accelerated, where people were starting to look outside these dense metropolitan areas and get away, and that lifestyle appealed to them. Montana is a great example of that, and there's a huge influx of people from California and Nevada into Montana.
Have you ever been to Montana? Because I never have.
No, I never have either.
It sounds like it would be a fascinating place to visit. I don't know about living it quite yet at my age, but it's a fascinating place to visit.
Yeah. So yeah, Montana's been growing rapidly, like you said. Idaho, Utah, these sort of additional, Silicon Valley offshoots where where companies are moving in for sure. And then don't forget, like Washington, Colorado, Arizona. These were states that were already growing rapidly, and that's continued. There's been a population shift out west anyway, and so Washington up 14%, Colorado 14%, Arizona up 17%. Like yep. Those things, those trends, like 2020 was just a blip, and they sort of basically resumed on the path that they were on.
Yeah, it's true, and it's going to be very fast. It's going to be fascinating, and I do mean that literally, to see what happens this year, because you have sort of a combined sort of things happening right now, where not only are things getting back to normal, but also prices are going up. Right. So what exactly will this mean for promo sales in 2022? I don't know, but there's a lot of things that are moving sort of in concert with each other.
Yeah. And on that note, cost of living is obviously a big concern right now. And so, states out west obviously have a more attractive proposition for people just looking to have their money go further.
Great.
All right. Let's go to the east. 4.6 billion overall, 7% growth for the region. Obviously lacking in comparison to the South and the West. And, the biggest reason why, I mean, look, the state of New York, it's 980 million, but only 2% growth in 2021. Why was New York so low?
I mean, I think too many cases, New York is still kind of low. I mean, a lot of the, conventions that were in the city have not necessarily returned yet. Right. Mm-hmm. New York they're not having an inflow of people into the city yet. Right. The city life is still different from what it was pre-COVID. So that's certainly having an impact. And I mean, I've been to New York since, COVID happened, and it's not back to where it was. The fact that it got hit pretty hard, but you've also had, again, what you mentioned earlier, a migration sort of out of the cities into other locations. And it's a lot of times people just retiring. That's really what it comes down to. It's people retiring and moving to lower cost locations and lower tax locations, which very often are in the, Southwest or the southern region, Florida, Arizona, so on and so forth. Some of the other states here, they've done better, but a lot of those states, like look at, think about Pennsylvania, think about Virginia, think about Jersey, they're not quite what I would consider to be major urban centers. No offense to Philadelphia here, right? Okay. but there's a lot more space in Pennsylvania than there is if you think about the metropolises of New York City or Boston or something like that. You can spread out a little bit more. So you have seen some improvements in those, but again, relative to some of the other states, it's pretty minimal. Some of the bigger ones, and the ones where you see the biggest growth in, those like the most rural states. The New Hampshire's up by 21%.
Yeah.
The Maine's up 16%. Vermont up 14%. So again, but those overall, those are just small overall markets comparatively. I mean, combined, they don't even equal New Jersey, for God's sake. Never mind New York.
And one thing that I think we forget is that, so this is 2021 data, right? Well, for much of 2021, we were going through the COVID spin cycle where things were opened and closed again. And I think those effects were most pronounced in the East. They're just the heaviest restrictions, the tightest controls, and that I think that had a definite effect on this data.
They seem, I mean, we lived through it, so yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah. So I did say earlier, all the states were up. That is true. But there was one place that was down.
Yes.
The District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., as it's also known as, negative 9%. Why was D.C. down so much?
I mean, D.C. is a very transient location anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's be honest, it's very transient, and you have a lot of people that are moving in and out, and so with the COVID thing and with the different changes in how people are working, you could actually get people who didn't necessarily have to move to DC to do their job, at least in 2021 for the better part of it, right? So they could do their job from whatever. So it's funny, you had less people moving into DC, yet prices to move into DC were still astronomically high. It's really one of these things that economically doesn't make all that much sense. But that's really what it was. It was just you had a new administration, right, that came in. And there was because of everything that was going on. And I mean, early 2021, let's be clear, we were in the depths of COVID still, right?
Sure.
I mean, we were still pretty deep into it. So you just didn't have as much movement in and out, and that has an impact on overall promo sales and just events and things such as that.
Yeah, and also things to remember. There's a huge influx of buying of PPE in 2020. A lot of that was driven by the government is one reason that DC did so well. That sort of hangover in 2021 definitely had effect on promo sales, and also just being a non-election year is another factor. That's sort of a historical trend, right? So I think all that contributed for DC, but it could bounce back next year for sure.
Oh yeah.
All right, so we're going to go to our last region. That's the Midwest. 4.3 billion overall, 9% growth. So that's actually more growth than the East, but it's lower in total market size. So Nate, for this region, the Midwest, what jumped out to you?
It's not so much that anything particularly jumped out to me in the Midwest. It's as a whole, though, you don't see nearly as much variation as you see in some of the other regions. Right, so it's much more homogenous than it is in some of the other states where you have sometimes they're up by some states are up by 8%, some are up by 30%. Like you have out on the West Coast. So it's much more homogenous. You don't see necessarily a huge amount of growth, and honestly, that's because like a lot of the bigger states here in the Midwest, similar to the Northeast, they're pretty static in terms of population inflows and outflows. And in terms of unemployment, they've sort of been at the same general levels, with the exception, right, of the big gigantic spike that happened in March, April, and May of 2020. So it's just sort of like it's sort of very, very steady here, and that's kind of reflected in the growth percentages. I know it doesn't seem like a 6% growth or a 13% growth in some of these states is steady, but it actually comparatively it's not spiking compared to what we've seen in some of the other states.
Yeah, and I think also worth noting that if you look at the biggest states in this region, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, those states, 6% growth for Ohio, 3% for Illinois, 8% for Michigan. So even though it's sort of homogenized, when the top of that list is on the smaller side, you're just not going to see the same sort of overall gains that you're going to see in other regions.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
All right, so sort of as a wrap up, Nate, I'm sure we're going to talk about this more next month when we do a podcast on state of the industry. But looking at where things are now, like, we've heard about buyer sentiment being strong, but obviously issues with supply chain and staffing, and now we have this this talk of a looming recession hanging over us. Where are things potentially going to go? I said potentially because I know your economic forecasting skills are not 100% guaranteed.
Yeah, I was gonna interview you for a job at the Fed apparently. I know somebody who works there. I can go talk to him. Listen, I don't know that the story for 22 has necessarily been written yet, right? The story for 2020 by this point was kind of pretty hard written pretty hard in stone already. Mm-hmm. And for 2021, it was definitely as well for recovery. If inflation continues where it is and gas prices stay at $5 a gallon, I think we're in for a bit of a challenging year, right? But with that said, events are back. The things that really are sort of the lifeblood for the promotional products industry, they're back. Yeah. Travel is back. Everything's more expensive, and I think people are. It's funny. I just read an article not that long ago, today, where they were talking about how Americans and businesses have a huge amount of money in savings, more so than they've ever had, and more than the government actually considers healthy for the overall economy. So what I think you're going to see is people are still going to do what they're going to do despite the cost. So I think that overall, I think it still should be a fairly strong year. Q2 is a bit of an anomaly. I don't know where that's going to come out, just because you've had all of a sudden the inflation hit hard in Q2. Supply chain is not getting any better in some parts of this country and for some types of products. So there's been a lot of noise about that and a lot of problems. I would be shocked straight up if 2022 wasn't up from 21. I mean, let's be honest here. I still think we're going to continue an upward trend. Do I think it's going to be up 12%? I don't know about that, like it was this past year. But I do think it's still going to be a reasonably strong year. And if you're, happen to be located or doing business in specific markets or specific areas of the country, I think it could even be even better.
Well, I would say this: if you're working in numbers and research, never boring right now, right, Nate?
Oh, it hasn't been boring for a couple of years, man.
The sexy, action-packed world of data and research.
That's why I walk around wearing my cape in the office sometimes.
Well, thank you, Nate, for joining us today.
Yep.
And remember, everybody, so our state and regional sales report, you can find that on our website at asicentral.com/news. You can also find it under the research section on our website. Again, there's all of Nate's wonderful data, along with on-the-ground reporting and talking with distributors, trends, and find out what's going on in your state and your region. So lots of great information. All right, thank you, Nate. Thank you very much.
TJ, pleasure.
All right, everybody, thank you very much for watching. Have a great day.